fundamental issue now before our people can be stated briefly. It is, are the American people fit to govern themselves, to rule themselves, to control themselves? I believe they are. My opponents do not.
I believe in the American Constitution. I favor the American system of individual enterprise. I am in favor of protection. I believe in the permanent court and further limitation of armament. I am opposed to aggressive war.
In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes.
Whether we shape the future in the image of our hopes is ours to determine by our actions and our choices. If we succeed, generations to come will say of us now living that we mastered our moment.
Americanism, not globalism, will be our credo.
Putting America first. This is The Right Take.
Hello, everybody. How's it going? This is episode number 59 here of The Right Take, closing in on number 60 already. My goodness, feels like just yesterday we started this podcast. I am Eric Lendrum, here with my co-host Jacob Grandstaff, and we have got a jam-packed show for you guys here today. This is an episode from the moment we both collectively realized what our main topic was going to be, we immediately started looking forward to this one. And that says a lot, especially considering that our last episode, of course, was our second ever interview with Tom Pappert, now with his new outlet, Valiant News. An hour and a half of Tom Pappert being Tom Pappert. It was fun. It was very informative. It defied a lot of some of the more mainstream narratives and rhetoric you may have heard. We highly recommend you guys check out that episode again if you have not already, or listen again if you want another good laugh. So we are going to be talking about elections, again, as always, both here and abroad. Once again, I know you usually don't talk about foreign policy here, or foreign happenings generally here on The Right Take, but more elections are around the corner as 2022 gears up, not just for the United States, but for some of the most important European countries. We are going to check in on our latest certified Biden moment. You think it can't get worse, but then it somehow does with this guy. But before we get to that and our very, very spicy main topic, I've said before, I like to hand out white pills here on The Right Take. I like to be a little more optimistic than most on the dissident right, because I think there is a lot to be hopeful for going into 2022. And I'm not just talking about the midterms, but in just the immediate future, 2024, certainly and beyond. And there's one number that a lot of people do not think about when it comes to elections. Most people think approval ratings. They think about, the polls that's showing like a matchup of the Democrat versus the Republican, whatever, the usual numbers that, the 538, the Nate Silvers, and all those number crunching nerds with bow ties love to cover. But there's one number that truly matters the most in any election, in any political environment before any of those. And that is voter registration. And this has only been reported on a handful of times here, but it is definitely worth noting because the latest voter registration trends seem to indicate what we already think to be true. And again, not just from the generic ballot of Republicans up 7 points over Democrats on generic ballot. No, if these numbers are any indication, then yes, we are going to see a red wave in November, and some even possibly calling it already a red tsunami. And it is happening especially in the swing states. First, Fox News reported that in Florida, the great state of Florida, Republican voters now outnumber Democrats by over 100,000 for the first time ever in the state's history. Now, it goes without saying that is a pretty darn big deal because Florida, of course, has widely been seen as the quintessential swing state. It, of course, is, for the last 10 years, it was worth 29 electoral votes, worth the same amount of votes as New York, for example. It was one of the absolute biggest states in the country in terms of population, and it was seen as the quintessential swing state. It was seen as the state that, any president had to win in order to have a shot at becoming president, of course. So all these recent elections that happened, Florida, the presidential races in 2012 and 2016, the races for governor and senator in 2018, all of which decided by literally 1 point or less, as is the case in Florida. Florida politics, it's just always stupidly close. And keep in mind, with those elections, with Ron DeSantis winning, with Rick Scott winning, and with Trump winning in 2016, and Romney only barely losing the state to Obama in 2012, those all happened back when Democrats outnumbered Republicans in Florida. Presumably by 100,000, maybe even by more. Democrats always have generally been good at voter registration. And keep in mind, what that means then is for these previous elections where DeSantis barely squeaked it out over the guy who loves to do cocaine in hotel rooms, the Republicans had to win those not only by turning out their base, but also by winning independents by a sizable margin, not just, 51 or 52%. They had to win a decent number of independents and even maybe swing some Democrats, which DeSantis certainly did in his election, particularly performing well with black women on election day, among other demographics. But they had to really pull out all the stops. They had to turn out their side and convert a lot of other people. Now, with Republicans outnumbering Democrats in Florida, all they have to do is just turn out their side and win just half of independents, even just half, which, again, if polls are an indication, independents are overwhelmingly breaking for Republicans right now. Certainly the Youngkin election was one example. Suburban voters are already swinging back to Trump over Biden, so they're going to do fine with independent voters. But what this seems to indicate, obviously, is that, Florida is probably going to be solidly red. Trump won the state over Biden by 4 points, which obviously does not sound like much, but in Florida standards, that's a landslide.
Yeah, because a lot of those Democrats are still the old school blue dog Democrats who would vote for Democrats at the local election, of course, known as the term blue dog, because even if there's a blue dog on the Democratic ticket, they're going to vote for him. But these are older people who were conservative but would vote locally for Democrats. And so even though that number was skewed in favor of Democrats, it was a much more conservative state than just the registration would show.
Exactly. And of course, if these latest numbers are any indication, DeSantis is probably going to win re-election pretty easily. All of his opponents for the Democratic nomination are complete jokes, like Charlie Crist, the guy who's been a member of 5 different political parties in his career, among others. But that is, you can't understate the importance of this. We've talked about how some swing states like Ohio and Iowa, maybe North Carolina, traditional swing states are shifting pretty firmly to the right. But if Florida turns into a pretty decisively Republican state, as it already has, they got 2 Republican senators, a Republican governor, Republican-controlled legislature passing all these incredible laws like the parental rights law, then that's huge. That is huge for future Republican electoral prospects. If they have those 29, now 30, because remember, Florida was one of the few states that gained an electoral vote, gained 1 seat in the House of Representatives with the census. So now it's worth 30 electoral votes. So if Trump or whoever the nominee is in 2024 can just be guaranteed that 30 electoral votes right off the bat from Florida, and for the immediate future, 28, 32, and beyond, that's a really big deal that will absolutely destroy the Democrats' chances of having a sizable majority in the Electoral College as they had in previous elections. But it's not just Florida. This has been reported by Reuters. One of the other swing states seeing a massive surge in Republican registration is Pennsylvania, another one of the most important swing states in the country for sure. Reuters reports that the GOP in Pennsylvania has converted 4 Democrats to Republican for every 1 Republican converted to the Democratic Party. Other swing states that are seeing similar growth include North Carolina, where Republicans are converting 3 Democrats for every 1 Republican converting to Democrat. And Nevada has also seen a significant rise in Republican registration, while Democrats barely rose in the same period of time. And a couple other states like New Hampshire and Arizona have actively cleaned up their respective voter rolls of inactive voters, which, as we all know, benefits Republicans because Democrats benefit more from voter fraud. So these are the numbers. This is not from Politico. Jacob, I think you said a while ago that when leftists who aren't totally insane want to sound the alarm for the left as a whole, they go to Politico.
Right.
This is not Politico. This is Reuters. But that certainly to me sounds like an alarm bell piece right there, if ever I've heard one. That is definitely one of those things where someone comes up with these, wonky, numbers, just this fact-based analysis and says, hey, this may not be juicy or spicy cultural topics, but this is something that doesn't lie. This does not bode well for them in November. And of course, I am here for that all the way.
So you may have heard about Oberlin College. Oberlin is one of the most liberal colleges in the country. In 2016, shortly after Donald Trump was elected, there were a bunch of students who went to a local bakery, a bakery that has been there it's an institution in the town. It's been in that town since going back to, I think, before the Civil War. And these students, there are a couple of black students. One of them was seen stuffing bottles, like wine bottles, in his coat pocket. Another one didn't pay.
Oh, boy.
And the grandson of the owner confronted him about it, and they ran out. He chased them and got into a fight with both of them. The police were called. They were arrested. And, of course, the students, they decided to protest. Like 200 students decided to protest this bakery. They claimed that the bakery was racist. They printed out flyers, those flyers all over town, given, of course, the students' perspective of things, claiming that this white grandson of the white owner, just saw these black people in his bakery, and being natural white supremacists in this small Ohio town, he naturally assumed that they were stealing things because they were black. And, of course, they spread this rumor all over town. The business lost customers who had been loyal customers for years. They were branded as a racist by everyone in town, by the university. But what's interesting is the university itself it wasn't just an issue of these students going out on their own initiative and doing this. The dean of the students at the university was supporting this. They actually let them use the university's printers to print off these flyers. They participated in these student-led rallies against this bakery. So the bakery naturally took them to court and sued them, and recently the judge ruled in the bakery's favor. And Oberlin College had to pay them $30 million. Now, they're wanting to appeal to the state Supreme Court, but I don't see that being overturned. That's going to be upheld. Of course, even if they want to appeal it to the U.S. Supreme Court, the U.S. Supreme Court is not going to take something like this,
right?
Because it's not something like of significant constitutional law. It's pretty libel law.
Yeah.
Is pretty well established. So, but yeah,
it's a civil suit. That $30 million, that's Nick Sandmann money right there. Oh my God.
Well, the fact that he's going to Transylvania University, it kind of makes me question how much money he actually did get paid. But that's different.
Fair enough. Yeah, but either way, $30 million, that's no joke.
It is not a joke. Even for their endowment, I think is 1 point. Well, actually, I got the article. This is from Bloomberg. So by the way, you mentioned that whenever leftists want to sound the alarm of things they need to pay attention to, Bloomberg is another one, because that's the quintessential neoliberal financial news site.
Right.
So this is by...
Of course, given its namesake.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so this is by Noah Feldman. Colleges should pay heed to Oberlin's costly libel suit. He writes, if colleges still thought there was little risk in taking up their students' causes, they should reconsider in light of what happened to Oberlin College. And, of course, he goes through the fact that the appeals court ruled in favor of the bakery and upheld the $30 million plus in damages in this lawsuit. He writes, the case has gotten lots of attention as a touchstone in the culture wars and because of the free expression issues surrounding it. Although the case could still be appealed to the Ohio Supreme Court, even conceivably the U.S. Supreme Court, it is now possible to derive some hard-headed lessons from the process thus far. For one thing, universities need to be extremely careful about how they interact with student protests if they want to avoid being held liable for their students' words and actions. And he points out how you've got an extremely left-wing university like this that is hammering in these students' heads that white people are racist, that America is an institutionally, systemically racist nation. So naturally, those students are going to automatically assume that a small-town, white-owned business is going to be a racist, because this is what they're taught in history class. This is what they're taught in their political science classes, that the vast, unwashed masses out there of white Americans in the heartland are racist. So they've already got this predisposed belief that if a black student is accused of stealing, then obviously he didn't steal. He was just accused of stealing because of his skin color. And this guy, Noah Feldman, he's trying to sound the alarm. Hey, you colleges need to pay attention to this, because $30 million isn't exactly chump change. Now, their endowment, they're one of the richest private colleges in the country. Their endowment is $1.2 billion. So they're not exactly going to be hurting for money, but this is still $30 million is not chump change. It's something they could have done. They could have kept and put it toward another diversity course or another, I don't know, they could have built another building and hired 30 more non-binary, DEI instructors or whatever with that money. So, yeah, another white pill. The good guys win again in this one. So this is great, because the thing is, I read an article on this. The owner, who is the grandfather of the guy who ended up getting in a fight with these two students, he was well respected in the community. He had lived there his whole life, and then once the word got out that they were a racist institution, a racist establishment, because it's a college town, a lot of the residents are going to lean more liberal. Then people just assumed that it was true, and they stopped interacting with him. They stopped talking to him. They stopped going to his bakery. The business lost money. So to see this family vindicated in this is really is a genuine white pill.
That's fantastic. And the college suffers heavily for it financially, which is also a huge win.
Yeah, $30 million isn't enough. I would prefer to see about $300 million, but we'll take what we can get. In unrelated good news, we talked a little bit about January 6th and the persecution that these protesters have faced. One of them, actually two of them, have committed suicide because of the charges they faced.
Christopher Stanton, Georgia, and Matthew Perna.
And what we've seen is there are about 800 people who are arrested so far, and they're still looking for about 2,500 more that they're trying to identify. But about 800 have been arrested. About 130 to 150 have entered plea deals. Mm-hmm. And of course, when the left reads this, they're like, okay, so these people are admitting that they broke the law.
They're admitting that they're insurrectionists, basically.
Yeah, they've admitted that they're insurrectionists, so, we're vindicated in our belief that these people were trying to overthrow the government. But most of these plea deals are for parading without a license. So these are misdemeanors. They warrant typically 10 days to 2 weeks in jail. The judges are giving them the harshest sentences possible, so some of these people are getting 2 months in jail. But they're still misdemeanors. Very few of these are felonies.
And a lot of these plea deals are also coming about because, the judges or whatever, the prosecutors, are threatening them. Like basically saying, hey, we'll put you away for life and you'll rot in jail unless you make a plea deal. So that's also part of it.
Right, but also another big factor is the fact that most of these people assume that they're not going to get a fair trial in Washington, D.C.
Because of course they're not going to get a fair trial.
Because it's not just a matter of the court costs, because most of the people don't have a lot of money. They can't crowdfund because they've got to rely on places like GoSendGo because GoFundMe won't let them crowdfund.
And of course, when they rely on GiveSendGo, I think it gets hacked by leftists. So they have no options at that point.
So one of the main reasons why they were entering these plea deals is because there was no precedent set of one of the J6 protesters being acquitted. Well, that streak has now been broken. This is from the Washington Examiner. A man who admitted to entering the Capitol building on January 6th was acquitted of charges brought against him on Wednesday afternoon after successfully arguing police let him through. U.S. District Court Judge Trevor McFadden found Matthew Martin, an engineer from New Mexico, was found not guilty after a 2-day bench trial. After being arrested in April 2021, Martin had been charged with entering and staying in an off-limits building as well as disorderly and disruptive conduct. He said, quote, "I saw no violence." Martin claimed during the trial that he had entered the building because he had believed that he had permission from police who allowed him to enter, according to BuzzFeed News. Although prosecutors tried to argue Martin should have known better as he walked past "Are Closed" signs and proceeded to record and encounter the chaos taking place, McFadden said during his decision that Martin's plausible belief outweighed the arguments according to the outlet. And there was actual footage of that McFadden viewed that showed that Martin was being waved in by police officers. In fact, he hesitated before going in to make sure the police officers were going to let him go into the building. And many videos.
There's so many videos of this
where the police are, if they're not waving the protesters in, they're standing aside, they're opening doors for them, they're removing the barriers out of the way so these protesters can walk in. And the police argument, at least the Capitol Police argument, this is what they said, that the reason they did that was because they didn't have enough manpower to stop these people from entering the building. But that's plausible from some of the videos, but whenever these people are peacefully walking up to the building and the police officers are moving the barriers out of the way without even telling them, no, you can't go in, then it's kind of hard to believe that that's the reason why they were letting them in. I think that most of the police officers figured these people are peaceful. They're just going to walk around in the building, maybe protest, maybe yell and scream. They're not going to damage anything. But regardless of the reason, we do have video evidence of the police moving barriers out of the way and standing aside and waving the people in, allowing them to enter. And so the fact that this guy, Matthew Martin, was willing to stand trial, willing to risk going to jail and being convicted and having a harsher sentence, this set the tone for future potential people to stand trial and be acquitted. In fact, we do have evidence. There's one person who pleaded guilty, and he has recently withdrawn his guilty plea.
Yep, pulling a Michael Flynn, basically, which, again, absolutely can happen in any legal situations.
Yeah, there was a recent trial. One of the more high-profile ones was someone who was guilty of actually attacking the police officers, and he stood trial. And the news media was going berserk because they were saying if this guy is acquitted, it's going to set the precedent, and we're going to see a lot more of these J6 protesters end up being willing to stand trial. Because as it's been so far, that was the only trial up to that point because they were scared to stand trial because they knew that a D.C. jury being inoculated and indoctrinated with all of these anti-January 6 protester propaganda, that they would not allow these people to have a fair trial. But this J6 defendant who backed out of his plea deal, this also from the Washington Examiner, a man charged in the January 6 riot at the Capitol, backed out of a deal to plead guilty just days after a federal judge declared another defendant not guilty in the first acquittal connected to the attack. Sean Whitmer previously came to a deal to plead guilty to 4 misdemeanor charges next week, but he changed his mind after U.S. District Judge Trevor McFadden granted a full acquittal to another defendant, that is Matthew Martin, who was charged with entering a restricted building. So we're going to see a lot. There's so far, it's like 500 who have not stood trial, have not entered guilty pleas. I think you're going to see a lot more of them being willing to stand trial. And the more who stand trial, the more expensive this is going to get for the government, because it's much easier for the government to just get guilty pleas out of all these people, sentence them to 2 months in jail. And sure, 2 months in jail, it's not that much, but it's not the fact that they're trying to sentence them to harsh sentences. It's just about the headlines. They want to see those headlines showing that all these people are brought to justice, because it's all political.
Exactly.
It all matters at the end of the day if they can get that guilty verdict in the Politico headline.
Yeah, what was it that one deep state stooge said in an interview, like ABC or something, right after January 6th? He said, a shock and awe campaign. We want to get as many convictions as possible. So, that's what this is all about. And this works out perfectly well, too, because not only are they starting to lose the legal side of things, but they already have lost, I think, in the court of public opinion. We talked a few episodes ago about how very suspiciously, but not so subtly, in Biden's State of the Union address, he didn't mention January 6th once. And what coverage do you really see of January 6th? Like, you don't see it as much anymore from Democrats or from the mainstream media. Like, they'll talk about it every now and then.
Because they milked it of everything it was worth. They already got everything out of it they could.
They're not able to run on it anymore. Their plan was that they would use this like Biden tried to use Charlottesville in 2020. They were going to run on January 6th all the way through the midterms to stave off the usual historical precedent that the incumbent party loses seats, because they would just say, Republicans are the party of insurrectionists, and they would put pictures of the Capitol being stormed everywhere. But like, that obviously has not panned out for them, as the polls, as the registration numbers suggest. They're still going to get shellacked in November, and they may finally be realizing that at the very least, they will never admit they were wrong on January 6th, but they at least just won't keep talking about it anymore, which is good for us. And again, certainly if they start losing in court as well. So that was the shot. Here's the chaser. When I saw this, I could not stop laughing. Michigan. So we all know that story that broke in 2020. Again, in the midst of the COVID lockdowns, Gretchen Whitmer, the Wicked Witch of Michigan herself, imposed some of the strictest lockdowns in the nation. And there were protests. There were protests at the state capitol, peaceful protests, just like on January 6th, because they were really strict. And she was another one, kind of like Andrew Cuomo. She infamously defied her own lockdowns. Her husband went to a boat rental service on a lake in Michigan, and during the lockdowns, in like June or July, in the middle of the summer, and tried to ask the proprietor, hey, can you rent us a boat? And the owner's like, sorry, we're shut down for business because of the governor's mandates. And the guy was like, you know who I am? The governor's my wife. Like, so they tried. It was very widely reported on that she, like the French aristocracy prior to the revolution, they defied their own rules basically and lived above the peasants. So the story goes, that the feds pushed on us and the media pushed on us, is that a bunch of hillbillies in Michigan said, let's kidnap the governor because she's locking us all down. So they arrested like a whole bunch of guys, like a dozen guys, with plotting to kidnap the governor. This was too good. On Friday, the jury ultimately ruled on 4 of the defendants. 2 of them, Daniel Harris and Brandon Caserta, were found not guilty of conspiring, quote, to unlawfully seize, confine, kidnap, abduct, and carry away, and hold for ransom and reward, or otherwise, the governor of the state of Michigan. On the same day, the jury was deadlocked on the verdict for 2 other defendants, Barry Croft Jr. and the alleged ringleader of the plot, Adam Fox. So 4 guys basically got off. Well, 2 guys got off free. The other 2 guys could go to a retrial, but given the amount of money the government has to spend on that, like you said, it's a financial burden for them. There's a chance that the case against those 2 might just be dismissed altogether due to that. So that, just like January 6th, in a lot of ways, this Whitmer thing was kind of a prelude to January 6th in that they try to use this to demonize, Trump supporters and anti-lockdown people by saying that they'll try to overthrow the government. They'll try to kidnap the governor, even though it has been widely reported now that this really was just a bunch of feds, like federal informants, federal agents, both types, informants and agents alike, confidential informants, that's the official term, going up to a handful of guys at these lockdown protests and kind of nudging them, trying to put the seeds in their mind of like, hey, we should kidnap the governor. And then once they kind of say, okay, we'll talk about it. There was no backroom meeting. It's not like a big militia group met in a barn in the middle of the woods somewhere and discussed it. Like, they just kind of hinted at it, like, I don't know.
So they were hinting at it, but that, like, they technically did meet in a barn and discuss it, but it was all led by the FBI informant. The guy, Dan Chappelle, who was known as Big Dan, he was with this group, and then he didn't feel comfortable about them talking about killing police officers, allegedly. This is what he claimed. So he went to the FBI. The FBI paid him $60,000 to rat these people out. So for the following months, like 5 or 6 months, then he was purposely baiting these people because the FBI is like, hey, we're paying you $60,000. We need some juicy information here.
Pushing them harder and harder to say, hey, let's kidnap the governor, guys. Come on, let's do this already.
So it was, and this came out in the trial. It was his idea to buy the explosives, to learn how to use explosives. His idea to kidnap the governor. His idea to take her to a lake and put her out in a lake without a paddle or whatever. Like all of this was his idea. He was baiting these people. And so most of the testimony against these people was from this entrapment, from this FBI informant who was doing this stuff. And another guy who was also one of the informants, they couldn't use his testimony because he was arrested for a felony battery for beating his wife to a pulp shortly thereafter.
Oh, my goodness.
And then there were 2 other FBI agents.
The FBI sure knows how to pick them, don't they?
Yeah, there's another one. He got arrested as well. And then another one, he ended up being a double agent. They thought that he was going to be on their side, and he ended up committing a crime while he was working undercover with this group. So they ended up using about 12 different agents to try to bring these guys down. And it's very obvious that the FBI is politically motivated, that they're purposely seeking out militias because the FBI is run by people who still have in their mind that there's a big militia movement in America like there was back in the 90s after Ruby Ridge, because in the 90s you actually did have a legitimate large militia movement out in the woods, especially out in the far west, and they still, in their mind, they're thinking there's dozens of militia groups who are going to try to overthrow the government. We've got to infiltrate these people and bring them down. So they're throwing ridiculous amounts of resources, like paying the guy $60,000 for 6 months' work of just ratting these people out. It's just, the whole thing was pretty ridiculous to the jurors, which is why they ended up acquitting. Of course, if you read the mainstream media, they're perplexed. They can't figure out, like, why would they acquit these people? We have them dead to rights. This is going to send a message to right-wingers that it's open season on governors,
I wish. No, but in all seriousness, again, they live in their own bubble when they just believe whatever they want to believe, when clearly the facts of the matter. I'm surprised by this, that, a jury ultimately found these guys not guilty, because with the political pressure over this case, you would think that ultimately would be that they would find them guilty just because they were terrified of the pressure. But like the Rittenhouse verdict, I think this is the biggest legal white pill, I think, along with the January 6th thing, the biggest legal white pill certainly since Rittenhouse was acquitted.
Well, see, they can turn up the pressure on somebody like who was the guy who killed George Floyd?
Derek Chauvin.
They can turn up the pressure on somebody like Derek Chauvin. They can turn up the pressure on with the Ahmaud Arbery case. Mm-hmm. But the thing is, they only have so much media ammunition. Right. And if they're constantly making a high-profile trial out of every single politically motivated trial, you've got dozens of these every year. Eventually, the public is just going to tune it out. It's like, okay, another trial. I'm over this. So this is why they can't. They're running out of steam. They're running out of ammunition, and there's just eventually
they overdid it. They overstepped their boundaries.
And so just one more topic, one more point on this particular case. This guy Chappelle, he texted one of the defendants 1,000 times between June and October of 2020. He was trying to cultivate a close relationship with him. On 5 occasions, he offered to give him a $5,000 credit card if he would agree to go through, give him incriminating messages against himself. And get this, the guy was living in a basement with no indoor plumbing, no toilet. Like, these people were drug addicts who ended up getting entrapped. These are really, really poor people who were victims, really, of the FBI trying to go after people who have been thrown aside by the system, who don't have college degrees, who don't have jobs, who are struggling to make ends meet, and are angry at the government. And the FBI is specifically targeting these people to try to bring them down, basically just to use as scalps.
So to see the FBI just constantly losing, whether it's this or the DOJ losing with January 6th, it's all so good. I actually stand corrected, too. I said that January 6th thing was the shot and the Whitmer thing was the chaser. How about this, Jacob? The Whitmer thing is a shot in and of itself, and the chaser is if she loses this November. Because she's up for re-election, and it appears the front runner for the Republican nomination against her is James Craig, the former chief of the Detroit PD, who obviously has a thing or two to say about law and order, given that Detroit was a hotbed of that stuff. So that especially is one of those cases where she could very well lose, and Republicans hope to make gains in a very important governor's seat there. So imagine that with all this, that not only can she not get these people prosecuted because they dared to protest against her, because that's what it was. They weren't actually trying to kidnap her. They just didn't like her policies, and she couldn't stand that. It's the same with Biden and the January 6ers. But imagine on top of that, she loses with all the media on her side, and then she loses the election as well. That is she's one of the most hateable Democrats in the country, I think. She deserves all of the suffering that she's getting between this humiliation and hopefully political humiliation in November as well. So we promised it earlier at the beginning of the episode, a certified Biden moment. I swear. I mean, it's well documented. This guy is just an absolute moron, probably borderline retarded, and due to his senility, obviously, his dementia, whatever you want to call it, Alzheimer's, whatever's going on with him. If you were to compile all of Biden's gaffes throughout his entire career, which gaffes, quote unquote, only really goes back to when he was vice president. He wasn't doing this kind of stuff when he was senator, but certainly since, 2008, 2009 up to now, all of them compiled together would easily be the length of a Godfather movie at the very least. And the latest one, multiple one-hit wonders came out of this event where he invited his old boss, Barack Obama, back to the White House. Ostensibly, it was for an event on, Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, for some reason, even though that bill's barely alive at this point since it was gutted by the Trump administration. I don't know. But obviously, what they were really doing here was a PR move. They're trying to bring back the only remotely popular national Democratic figure in politics today. The latest polls, I know, John Nolte of Breitbart talked about this. Trump has higher favorability ratings than any of the national Democratic figures, more than Biden, more than Kamala, more than Pelosi, and more than Schumer. Obama's the only one who, and this may be in large part due to the fact that, he's just been out of office for so long. You could argue the same thing with George W. Bush. People think a little less harshly of Obama now. So Biden strutted his old boss back into the White House, and Obama completely took over the show, and no one cared about Biden or even Kamala anymore. And Obama himself was aware of this.
Thank you, everybody. Have a seat. Have a seat. Thank you. Vice President Biden, Vice President. That was a joke.
I just want to say, can you imagine if Reagan had done that with Bush Sr.? He wouldn't do that. That's something that Reagan would have never even thought of doing.
There's joking, and then there's being disrespectful or openly throwing shade at one of your colleagues in front of everybody, which is that's definitely what that was. Because I think it's no secret. We were talking about this just before we went on the air. Obama and Biden don't really like each other that much. It's not like they have some JFK versus LBJ rivalry or anything, but they are both come from such different worlds, different backgrounds, different careers in politics. Certainly, again, Biden spent half a century in politics, and Obama didn't even finish one full term in the Senate before he became president. So I think in a lot of ways, they definitely still do not really like each other. They tolerated each other for the uses they each brought politically to their ticket.
Now, apparently, Biden. Now, what's funny is Biden tried to make a joke about it as well, to make the same joke in it. This is the cringiest thing you can possibly imagine. It's so cringe that a lot of people were spreading this around thinking they didn't even realize that he was joking. This is just how old Biden has gotten, and how I won't say that. This is just how demented that Biden has gotten, to the point where whenever he tells a joke, people can't even tell it's a joke.
Thank you very much. Please. My name is Joe Biden. I'm Barack Obama's vice president. And I'm Jill Biden's husband. By the way, the only reason Jill's not here today, she's working. She's teaching. And so,
oh my God, the scattered, faint laughter.
It's sad. It really is sad. But then there's this. This takes the cake.
And I'm deeply proud of the work she's doing as First Lady with Joining Forces Initiative. She started with Michelle Obama when she was Vice President, and now carries on.
Well, so yes, you heard that correctly. While she was vice president. Now, here's the question. This has never happened before with a Biden gaffe. Who was he gaffing on this one? Was he calling Jill Biden vice president, or was he calling Michelle Obama vice president?
I think he recognizes that he wasn't Barack Obama's actual vice president, that Michelle Obama was Barack Obama's actual vice president. He was simply a figurehead.
Yeah,
and there to
school
show
lunch policy.
Yeah, he was there to be the old white man to get all the blue collar white voters in the Midwest to think that, okay, maybe this president actually isn't this isn't actually a racist administration against white people. We can vote for him because, hey, he's got old Lunchbox Joe on the ticket. Yeah, I think he recognizes he was simply a figurehead. He was put on Obama's ticket simply because of his background. That's the only reason he was put on the ticket. And Michelle Obama was the actual vice president.
And he was there to be like a specially appointed policy czar on certain issues. Like, kind of like what Biden did with Kamala. He put her in charge of the border when that started getting out of control. Obama did the same thing with Biden. He declared Biden will handle the gun control response after the Sandy Hook shooting. Mm-hmm. That's being the vice president is already a really useless job. Most vice presidents just kind of sit back and hope that their boss is the once in a several generation incident where they die in office or resign or something, so then they can just go directly to president without actually having to take it to the voters directly. But most of the time, they either have to get elected in their own right, or they end up failing and coming short, like Al Gore, so many of these others. So,
something else that Obama gave to Biden to kind of get him out of the way?
Yeah.
He put him in charge of Ukraine.
That's right. And, well, we see how that certainly worked out that kept Biden very, very happy for obvious reasons. And now, of course, looks like he is in a tough position of trying to protect his investments versus dragging us into another endless war, a potentially far more deadly war than what we just got out of. Speaking of foreign policy, though, on a much happier international note, one of my favorite things to talk about, as I've said before, I'm an elections nerd. I love talking about elections, primary elections here in the United States, voter registration numbers and whatnot, and certainly I love international elections. And there's a handful of them in 2022 in some of the most prominent countries. We had one a little while ago, just to set the context here. In early April, in Hungary, they had their parliamentary election once again every 4 years, where, as in most European systems, the legislature, whichever party is the majority, then picks one of their own to serve as prime minister. So it's like their legislative elections directly affect their presidential elections kind of thing. Their executive, the legislative controls the executive, as it were. It's the same in the UK. It's the same in a lot of these cases. And in Hungary, Hungary is one of those several Eastern European countries that is most decisively based. They have solid right-wing national populist leadership. Poland, Romania, and some others, Czech, a handful of others, mostly the former Eastern Bloc states, for kind of obvious reasons, now have hardcore right-wing nationalists in office. And the most prominent example is Hungary's prime minister, Viktor Orban, of the Fidesz party, who has been prime minister twice before, 2 non-consecutive terms, and most recently, he has been in this position of prime minister since 2010. Now, they had another election in April for their parliament, their National Assembly. And it has 199 seats total, so you need just 100 seats for a majority. And basically every other party in the parliament all joined together in one big coalition called United for Hungary, all sounding so magnanimous, all unanimous and everything, and united against Viktor Orban, said we're going to end his reign, we're going to end his rule, because the EU, this guy's one of the biggest headaches for the EU. He is not having any of this multicultural diversity stuff, this trans, queer, whatever nonsense, gender identity crap. He is fighting for Hungarians first. He's fighting for Hungarian families. He is not allowing immigrants into his country. He's everything a right-wing national populist should be. And polls for the longest time seem to indicate that, he'll probably win again, but it'll be narrow. His party will win by maybe 5 to 6 points. Not quite. They got 54% of the popular vote, which is the highest vote share of any party in Hungary since the fall of communism in 1989. It is their largest landslide since 2010. They ultimately came away with 135 seats, so just 2 seats more than they had in the previous election. Absolute majority. They crushed the opposition completely, and it set the whole EU back, basically, in terms of, especially in the context of the Ukraine thing, because he, like others, like these Eastern European leaders, basically kind of more or less says, I want nothing to do with this. We should not get involved here, because, again, Ukraine is not a NATO member. So that sets the stage for now why they are getting a lot more concerned over another election coming right up here in Europe, over in Western Europe, on the opposite side of the continent. France. So, for those of you who don't know, when it comes to French politics, there is one name that has been around for a few decades now that defines true right-wing politics. They have an establishment right-wing party that's also called the Republican Party, but the true right-wing is a party that was formerly called the National Front, and now it's called National Rally. And it's led by a woman named Marine Le Pen, who is the daughter of the founder of the original National Front Party, Jean-Marie Le Pen. She succeeded him as party leader, and she's run for president 3 times now in France. In 2012, where she came in third, in 2017, where she was the runner-up, and now she's running again here in 2022. So the French presidential election has kind of a blanket primary system like what you see in a handful of states here in the United States, in California and Louisiana and a few others, where a whole bunch of candidates run together in one big jungle primary, and if no candidate gets 50% or more of the vote, then the top 2 candidates go to a runoff election a couple weeks later. And that is what happened in 2017 when Marine Le Pen ended up finishing second to Emmanuel Macron, the guy who is now the president of France, who, of course, he was not from either the Republican Party or the major left-wing party, that being the Socialist Party, the party of the previous president, Francois Hollande. So he kind of burst onto the scene, as Jacob, you and I were talking about this on our way to the studio, that he kind of emerged from, he was an investment banker, right? He kind of emerged from the elite of Europe, and he was very much this wonder boy. I think he was 39 years old when he got elected. It's like one of the youngest heads of state ever. He, of course, was not from either of the major political parties. He formed a new centrist party, centrist, quote unquote, whatever that means, which in Europe really just means center left. and his party then swept the legislative elections a month later, and he has been basically the golden boy of Europe, basically seen as kind of the spiritual successor to Angela Merkel as the new head of the EU, basically. And, of course, he is running for re-election again for another 5-year term. And Marine Le Pen is running again, and the polls seem to indicate that it's going to be a rematch of the second round of 2017. It's going to be Macron first and Le Pen second. Now, what has them worried is that the opinion polling for a possible second round of Macron versus Le Pen is not quite what it was 5 years ago. 5 years ago, the final result ultimately was Macron's 66 to Le Pen's 34. Now, for quite a while, she was behind by double digits, maybe 10, 15 points, give or take, on track to lose very decisively to Macron again. In the last few weeks, certainly since the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, Macron's numbers have dipped. They rose for a little while when he tried to present himself as an elder statesman. He was the first world leader to talk to Putin right after the invasion, but that bump faded very quickly. And with that, Marine Le Pen is on the rise. And now, the most averages of the polls show her down by about 6 points. Some show her as close as 2 points or 3 points, which is within the margin of error. And at least one poll, right here, I have it here from Atlas Intel, has her ahead of him by 1 point. The first time ever that a candidate from National Front is potentially winning a runoff primary election.
Very nice, very nice.
Very nice. And the mainstream media is freaking out about this. I've been seeing so many articles on the main page of Yahoo or MSN from mainstream media outlets all about the French election and all sounding the general tone here. I'm going to read just a few headlines here. Politico. The White House is freaked out that Putin's next big win could be in Paris. New York Times. How Marine Le Pen threatens to upend French elections. The Daily Beast.
Upend French elections?
Yeah.
So she's going to upend French elections if she wins the French election.
Right. Yeah, she's going to destroy elections by winning an election.
That's kind of like how if Trump wins, he's going to undermine democracy. If he's democratically elected, then Trump will undermine democracy.
It's clearly not democracy, Jacob, if the preferred candidate of the deep state doesn't win. Obviously, that's how democracy works in the 21st century in the year 2022. The Daily Beast. France's Marine Le Pen is the Putin fan who could screw us all. This is my personal favorite. Of course, it's from The Guardian. Get ready for a scary fortnight in French politics. A Le Pen presidency really is possible. Dun, dun, dun. But all the talking points don't get complacent. She could actually win, guys. This could be Trump and Brexit. And the one talking point you see a lot, this would be the end of Europe. Marine Le Pen would be the end of Europe. Because, yeah, she is really Eurosceptic. She has actually softened her stance on the EU a little bit. She previously was just like Nigel Farage, let's have Frexit now. Let's get out of the EU, go back to the franc as our currency instead of the euro. We're done with this. But in recent years, certainly for this campaign, she has gone back on that and it now basically says, I don't support leaving the EU, I support reforming it. So ultimately, especially what happened is this election is quite interesting, the dynamics here. There was another candidate running even further to her right, a television personality and journalist named Eric Zemmour, who I guess, by all accounts, is the Tucker Carlson of France, basically. He ran purely on just immigration. We're going to shut down all immigration. We're going to deport all immigrants now. We talked about this previously, Jacob, at a town hall. He had one very blunt, two-letter, one-word answer for a woman.
Three-letter.
Three-letter. Oh, sorry, it was France. That's right. It was in French. Sorry. I was using the English version. But yeah, so he ran totally on immigration, whereas she's running on immigration, reforming the EU, also some more economic issues. She is appealing very much to the those who are struggling, the struggling working class, the same struggles we're seeing here in the United States with costs of living and the retirement age, et cetera, et cetera. So she's widely been seen as softening her image. So that is it's pre-mortem, I guess. They're getting ready for a post-mortem analysis saying she softened her image and that's how she won. But to see this happening now, when people thought what was it called? The Patriot Spring. Geert Wilders of the Netherlands called it the Patriot Spring after Brexit and Trump. All these right-wing national populist leaders rising to power all over the place. We were seeing it in Italy. We were seeing it certainly in Eastern Europe, Sweden, everywhere. People thought after Trump lost, Biden and the normalcy came back, that the Patriot Spring is dead. Well, the polls seem to indicate, if they're any indication in France, it's not quite dead yet, and it could actually be about to come back with a greater vengeance than ever before. Because it is true that if France were to elect someone like Marine Le Pen, then everything would change completely. That could not necessarily be the end of the EU, but it really would be a huge black eye for the globalist New World Order, as it were.
If you notice the tenor of the press over the past 10 to 15 years, well, not even 15 years, you go back 10 years and it wasn't this way. It really started in 2014. The way the press covers elections, every single election in every Western country is always an existential crisis.
Yep.
Because if the neoliberal candidate, if their preferred neoliberal candidate loses the election, then it means their version of democracy and their version of the world order will completely evaporate. And we will slide back into authoritarianism and fascism, and the world as they know it will end, because the reality is their world will end. If a Le Pen wins,
it's true, yeah.
If a Geert Wilders were to win, if you had an actual populist win in the UK, not somebody like Boris Johnson, if you had a Trump in 2024 win or someone even further to the right than Trump, then their world would end, because it would show that the general population is no longer under their spell. Because as it currently stands, the educated voters in these countries still read them. Like the New York Times is still in business.
Daily Beast.
Yeah, the election
Guardian.
of Joe Biden did not put the New York Times out of business like a lot of people were claiming. Like the educated population still follows these news outlets. Bloomberg is still in business. But yeah, every single election they've got to manufacture this is the second coming of Adolf Hitler. This is Mussolini on the ballot. We've got to do whatever we can to stop it. And really, it shows the invasion of Ukraine has really poked a lot of holes in their world, because the Prime Minister Mario Draghi of Italy, just to give an example, like he was telling the Italians, you can either choose. Do you want Putin or do you want air conditioning? If you use air conditioning, you're helping Putin to prosecute his war. And this is now the narrative. Like, Europeans, you're going to have to suffer because this is a war to defeat Putin. One woman on Twitter, one Italian woman, she filmed herself turning her AC on. As soon as she turned the AC on, and started playing the Russian national anthem, just to show that if you turn you can choose. You want to play that air conditioning, you're helping Putin. But this is, and Europeans aren't going to stand for it. Like Europeans they're going to get sick of this. Like, we want to live our lives in our country. We don't want to live our lives to support your world order. Like, we didn't choose this. And this is what we pointed out with the Truman Doctrine in the past. Americans didn't choose to be the world's police force. Our elites chose that for us, and they are trying to sell it to us on the basis of nationalism. Like, we've got to go fight them over there, or
so
they're
they
going to
come over here.
And eventually people are going to get wise to it, and they're going to be like, okay, why do I need to pay $10 a gallon for gas? Like, how does that help me and my family and my country and the world be a better place?
I love to see, like, the mainstream media reports, like, saying, like, for a little while there, I don't think they're doing it anymore, but they were saying, like, oh, the gas prices are higher than ever because of the Russia-Ukraine crisis, but Americans say they are willing to pay that price to stand up to Russia. They always say that. They say, Americans say, a majority of Americans say. They never show any proof. They never conduct a single interview, man on the street style, to ask anybody that. There are no polls anywhere to indicate that. They just say it.
No, the fact that people, they would argue the fact that people are paying it is proof that people are willing to pay it to defeat Putin.
Yeah.
They have to get to work, so they're paying $5 in gas. So the fact that they're still gassing up, apparently they don't have a problem with it.
Yeah, I hate the media so much, and that's why I want to see them cry and cope and seethe on election night when and if Le Pen wins. Because, again, the primary election is April 10th, which by the time we're recording this, of course, that will have happened, and we'll know then for sure whether or not she actually made it to the second round. But by all indications, she will. And the second round will be April 24th. So let's see if come April 24th, there will be crying and wailing from the Guardian to the Times. It will be truly, truly glorious.
So I didn't even know about this until yesterday. I got into D.C. yesterday. Today is Saturday. Yeah, today Saturday. Yesterday was Thursday was opening day. So I went to opening day. Did not go yesterday to the Nats game, but I did go into D.C. later, like around noon. But apparently yesterday morning around 8:30 during rush hour, there were a bunch of climate freaks who blocked 395. So right at 7th Street, which is the most busiest stretch of interstate in D.C., about 12 to 20 of these climate freaks got out there and sat down on the interstate and blocked traffic. Now, what's interesting, this is kind of unrelated to the white pills that we're covering, but what's interesting is we did talk about the trucker protests and how they were allegedly going to shut down D.C. They were going to block the Beltway. They were going to stop hundreds of thousands of people from getting to work and stuff. And, of course, none of that happened because they don't know how to protest. They don't know how to block traffic. Basically, they're just good, decent, polite people. The conservatives aren't going to go out and block people from getting to work so they can feed their kids. It's just not who they are. Unless it's something like, unless they themselves are being stopped from feeding their kids, they're not going to stop anybody else from getting to work to feed their kids. And this is why we discussed that unless this was an actual COVID vaccine mandate, that stopped people from going to work if they weren't vaccinated, you weren't going to see conservatives actually do what the Canadian truckers did. But if you see the way the climate activists, this is like a dozen climate activists who accomplished more in about an hour than the entire trucker protest did over the span of a week. Like
That's depressing.
They literally just got out there and sat down on the interstate, and it took an hour for the police to get out there and redirect traffic and get them all arrested and taken out. But it just shows, people who are fanatics are going to be much more effective at disrupting normal people's lives than people who are just decent, good, normal citizens, which is why the right is at a disadvantage. And when you're talking about protests, when you're talking about political activism, if you don't get people, this is why we talked about how the pro-life movement is really the closest thing we have on the right to the causes that the left champions. Because people on the right who are ardently pro-life, myself included, they understand this is an issue of life and death. And so they understand this is not just a political issue, but it's a spiritual issue. It's a moral issue. And so with something like these climate activists, they see climate change as a moral issue that really the future of humanity hangs in the balance.
They see it as their existential threat. I think Greg Gutfeld said it nicely a while ago. It's relatively outdated, but he said it a while ago back on Fox News that, at the height of, when Islamic terrorism was still very much a thing, certainly the decade after 9/11, but also in the mid-2010s with all the terrorist attacks every other day in Europe, he said that the climate change, global warming, whatever they want to call it, it's not real, but it's all the same. That to the left is what radical Islam was to the right. It was the existential threat in our world today. And of course, obviously, Islamic terrorism is still around, but it's not the biggest threat to us anymore. Certainly not compared to just a few years ago, and certainly not 20 years ago. But to them, they have the added advantage that global warming is always something that's going to be, it's going to be present at all times because it doesn't just affect one or two countries like terrorist attacks do. It affects the whole world, if it were real, that is.
So, and this kind of ties into our main topic today, which is going to be the groomer movement that's finally coming to light. Basically the spirit, it's almost like a spiritual crusade that you're seeing with the climate change stuff. This is the way the left, the activist left, sees every single issue. Everything is a moral existential crisis. And as we're going to show with some of the clips that we have from teachers, this is how they view the LGBT movement. This is a moral existential crisis. People who don't agree with the movement, they want to erase people from existence. In other words, they want to kill people's existence, even if they're not physically killing them. And this is the way the climate change activists see it. This is the way the pro-choice activists see it. And if the right doesn't understand this, that it's not simply about politics, because if you're trying to talk to normies on the right and get them excited about this stuff, get them passionate about this stuff, most of them, it doesn't click unless you hit an emotional nerve. So here's an example. Let's say, for instance, that I'm trying to convince somebody that we need to stop. Let's say if I'm pro-Ukraine, I'm trying to convince somebody that we need to stop the war in Ukraine by any means necessary. A person here who's struggling with gas prices, they're just not going to get it. But then if I can show them footage of a Russian bomb killing children and killing women, if I can show Russian soldiers raping Ukrainian women, then I've hit an emotional nerve. This is especially prominent with women voters. Then I've hit an emotional nerve, and they're like, yes, we've got to stop this by any means necessary, even if it means risking nuclear war.
And even if it doesn't affect us directly.
Yes, these people are willing to sit out on the interstate and risk being killed because they believe their cause is just to the point to where they're willing to give their lives for it. And this is what you have to try to make people understand. And this is why using that groomer terminology is so important.
Powerful, because few things are more powerful emotionally, spiritually, than the idea of threatening a child's vulnerability and innocence.
Yes, that is correct. So here's an example. A lot of people, everyone knows about the Florida bill. Everyone who follows politics knows about the so-called "Don't Say Gay" bill. What was Eric? Do you remember the name of the Florida bill that DeSantis signed that caused this outburst from Disney, claiming that they're going to do everything they can to fight this?
I don't remember the exact name of it, and that obviously is probably just a failure on my part, but also an indication of the success of the media campaign, that it is more commonly known as "Don't Say Gay," even though, as DeSantis has pointed out, it doesn't say that anywhere in the bill.
Well, I would say more people probably know of it as the anti-groomer bill than they do whatever it is actually called, because that's basically what it does. It's aimed at stopping groomers from grooming children in school. And we're going to get to the definition of groomer here in a second.
I just found it, by the way. It's HB 1557, also known as Parental Rights in Education. So it's a parental rights law is what it really is.
But so just to give we know the background on it. We know why Disney freaked out about it. But just to give people It's an idea of what this bill is trying to protect children and parents against. We give you this.
This video is for language teachers. If you don't know who I am, my name's Blossom. I use they, them pronouns in English, en español y en francés. I'm an educational consultant for gender and sexuality, and I specifically did my research on transgender people's attitudes towards pronoun usage in their native and additional languages. And this is me telling you that within whatever language you speak, non-binary people exist. And non-binary people are creating language so that they don't have to adhere to the gender binary. So we, as language teachers, need to be teaching our students, giving our students access to this language, especially for our non-binary students, regardless of if that language is accepted by a linguistic regulatory body.
Okay, and this is one instance where you guys in our audience should be glad this is audio only, because that thing on the screen is hideous. It's a dude in drag, wearing a dress, makeup all over his face, pink eyeliner, pink and orange eyeliner. He's wearing a wig. He's a teacher. And that is a problem. Wouldn't you agree, Jacob?
Let me put it this way. If I were a parent, that guy would not be a teacher for very long.
No, I agree with you on that one. That parent-teacher conference would get very, very WWE worthy very quickly if I were in that parent's position.
This has been my first year in preschool with a class of my own, teaching alongside another queer neurodivergent educator, and we have been rocking our twos class. We've been talking about gender and skin color and consent and empathy and our bodies and autonomy. It's been fabulous.
I noticed with the last guy too, but it occurred to me here. Listen to how happy she is. How happy, how thrilled she is to be talking about, sexual intercourse and genitalia with little kids.
Well, this goes back to what I was pointing out earlier about the climate activists. A lot of people think, okay, well, we can reach these people. And Christians, I understand we want to reach people with the gospel. But the thing you've got to understand is this is true with communists as well, actual Marxists, not Democrats that Republicans call communists, but the actual real thing is they don't really have any better angels for you to appeal to, because in their mind, they are fighting a moral crusade. You are the one who needs to appeal to your better angels to understand that you're wrong and that they are fighting for truth, justice, and good.
Equality, equity, opportunity, whatever they want to call it.
Yeah, so in their minds, you are in the wrong. You are the person here who needs to reach down and connect with your better angels to better understand how to make the world a better place. So you cannot appeal to these people and change their mind and win them over.
They have no sense of morality. They have no sense of like a higher being or something that is greater than them. They think the cause itself is the ultimate end goal, and because they don't have any sense of morality or virtue.
That is their morality. That's the thing. Like in their minds, they are pursuing morality.
Their morality is degeneracy. That's what it is. It's the freedom to be degenerate.
It is objectively degeneracy, but in their minds, they are pursuing objective morality. They are being virtuous. This is actual virtue by making the world a safe place for non-binary people and transgenders.
Let me rephrase that then. They have no sense of morality built on any definitive structure. Their entire worldview is based on there being no set definitions of anything. There's no foundation. There's nothing that came before them. Everything that does come before them, any sense of a foundation, any basis for terms or language or what have you, is wrong and needs to be torn down. That's the thing, going back to what that first guy in a dress was saying about language with non-binary people. It's very enforced to the fact that several languages, Spanish, Italian, and a few others, they have gendered language. This is where the Latin X thing came from. I took Spanish classes in college. In Spanish, if you have an adjective, you either end it with the letter O in reference to a man or A in reference to a woman. I think Italian is the same way. And that, of course, because there are only two genders. That's a fact, and that's how it has always been for the longest time. But now they're trying to say, "Oh no, that's sexist. That's transphobic. We need to create a new version." And that's why they say, Latino or Latinos, the prime example. They say, "Oh no, Latin X," which Biden pronounces as Latinx, which just sounds like the brand of tissues. But that's the funny thing too, is that is one great form of resistance they are facing, is that obviously most real Hispanics don't care in the slightest about that. They do not. They take one look and be like, "Who do you gringos think you are telling us to change our language? That's our language. You leave it alone. You want to do that in your English language? Do it there. Don't mess with our languages." And I'm sure the Italians probably feel the same way. But that's the point he was getting at before. Here is another one for you guys. I'm sorry. I know this may or may not be legally classified as torture, but it is very important to talk about this for the sake of the main topic and to emphasize how important this battle really is.
Your students call you by your first name or Mr. or Miss? Great question. This is actually a classic question. Here's your answer. Currently, my students just call me Desmond or Desi. First name. However, I have been at schools that go by last name. Those schools, I go by Teacher Fambrini. I am gender fluid, so I don't go by Mr. or Miss. I go by teacher because I am a teacher. So Desmond, Desi, or Teacher Fambrini.
Let me introduce you to our non-binary alpaca. The kids voted on a gender-neutral name, Alex, for them. Alex was there to help me during the really quiet moments when nobody would talk during virtual learning.
Yes, they were so quiet.
But then
it's a hand puppet, just so you guys are aware. Again, this is audio only.
Also took it as an opportunity to teach my students about how to respect people's pronouns. Did Alex ever get misgendered? Yes. But then it opened up some teachable moments about what to do when that would happen. For example, hey, Mr. Vung, did he just wake up from his nap? Oh, do you mean did they wake up from their nap? Yeah, they just did. I would apologize quickly, make the correction, and move on. I started off modeling how to correct somebody, and then afterwards my students would correct each other whenever somebody would misgender Alex.
Oh, God. That's the punchline.
This is exactly. That is the punchline. That's what they're trying to do. They're trying to teach kids to talk and act like non-conforming, gender, non-binary, transgender, et cetera, so the kids will end up correcting
patrolling each other.
And so once these kids become adults and they enter the corporate world, they will already know from a very young age how to patrol people who are not enlightened to this genderism, this transgender. No, it's not even transgender. Like
this is a whole new level. I mean, transgenderism is bad, but this is.
We don't even have a word for it yet to describe what exactly this is. Like this is insanity beyond the English description. They will learn. Basically, they will learn how to be groomers when they are adults, just like they were groomed as kids.
Representation in the classroom matters. My kids were 5th graders, and they still got a kick out of Alex. Oh yes, and here's Alex's friend, Lincoln the Llama, who goes by pronouns he, him. At first, my students thought that he had very feminine features, so they thought that he was a girl. And this is why we should never assume somebody's gender just based on what they look like. All right, Lincoln, say something. Hello. My students were really surprised how low his voice sounded.
Oh, my God. There it is again.
Aren't you thankful for TikTok? TikTok is the greatest invention ever.
It's like Chinese spyware that is promoting the most obscene degeneracy that, by the way, none of this would be allowed in China. If this guy, this Asian dude with a hand puppet, a non-binary alpaca hand puppet, tried to pull that in a Chinese classroom, he would be going to pay a visit to the Uyghurs, I think.
I was thinking more or less like, thanks to TikTok, we now have these guys coming on video and basically telling their audience that they assume agrees with them what they're teaching their kids in school. Like without they wouldn't even know. Because another thing they're doing is they're teaching these kids how to hide their beliefs from their parents. Mm-hmm. They're actually instructing these teachers are going on TikTok and saying, okay, here's how I'm teaching my kids not to let their parents in on what they're being taught at school.
Exactly. That is a good point. Yeah, that I agree with that as well. They certainly are exposing themselves. And that's why, again, we mentioned an account called Libs of TikTok that's active on social media that shares this kind of content to expose them, to show how insane they are. I have seen far too many Libs of TikTok videos for my own good, and I would say definitely the guy in the blazer was definitely the weirdest one for me because it was a little hard to tell which gender he was. The first guy in the dress was definitely the second worst. The woman looked normal enough, even though what she's saying wasn't normal. And this Asian guy definitely looks normal enough too. But I've seen some freaky people on TikTok. It is unpleasant, but it is necessary to show you this stuff and to show you the influence it is reaching in the corporate world. As we said, and they're not waiting for these kids to grow up. It's already happening in the corporate world. Which brings us, of course, to the one that I think has done the most to mainstream this, again, to our benefit, unintentionally on their part, and it's courtesy of the mouse, Disney. So Disney, of course, they're based in Florida. They have Disney World, one of their 2 major American theme parks. The other is in California, in Florida. So, of course, there was a lot of lobbying from the LGBTQ barbecue XYZ crowd to have Disney formally come out against the parental rights law. Say, oh, this is discriminatory against our pansexual 5-year-old dreamers. And, of course, DeSantis basically told them to get bent. He was not going to take any of their crap. And he floated the possibility of revoking the special self-governing status that Disney World apparently has. That's something I was not aware of, but that is a thing in Florida. And he's taking them head on, just like he took on the cruise lines over COVID mandates. He is not backing down, so props to DeSantis for that. But Disney recently had some videos leaked courtesy of, I believe it was Chris Rufo, one of the anti-critical race theory guys. The videos were leaked. It's been reported on by the Federalist and others, and they were having multiple Zoom meetings, executive-level Zoom meetings, to talk about how they are promoting, in their terms, LGBTQIA+. That's the latest incarnation of the acronym. This is one video you gotta listen to. This is Disney corporate president Carrie Burke. It's a little over a minute long. It's a lot less intolerable than those freaks on TikTok, but it's every bit as disgusting.
I'm here as a mother of two queer children, actually, one transgender child and one pansexual child.
I'm going to stop her right there real quick just to say, anytime and every time you hear an adult in 2022 say, I have a transgender child, that's not really what you should hear. What you should hear is, I physically and psychologically and mentally abuse my child. Because that's what's happening here. You're abusing your kid into thinking they're pansexual. Remind me, Jake, do you know what pansexual means? Because I don't.
It probably means that the kid can change their gender every day if they want to.
I thought maybe it just meant they were sexually attracted to pots and pans, but, these days, who knows? And, of course, transgender meaning, it's a little girl who thinks she's a boy or vice versa.
And also as a leader. And that was the thing that really got me, because I have heard so much from so many of my colleagues over the course of the last couple of weeks in open forums and through emails and phone conversations. And I feel a responsibility to speak, not just for myself, but for them, to all of us. We had an open forum last week at 20th where, again, the home of really incredible, groundbreaking LGBTQIA stories over the years, where one of our execs stood up and said, we only have a handful of queer leads in our content.
Okay, hang on. I got to stop you right there as well. LGBTQIA, XYZ, barbecue, KKK characters, stories over the course of so many years. Name me any handful of prominent, LGBTQ whatever. Because the thing is, they're going back now and again, writing history, rewriting history, revising it, retroactively claiming, oh, these people have always existed. The LGBTQYZ crowd has been around for generations. They've just been unheard. Okay, no, this has only been a phenomenon, a trend, a fad that's only been in for the last 10 years. 10 years ago, Jacob, Obama and Hillary were both against gay marriage. 10 years ago. And look at where we are now.
And I went, what? That can't be true. And I realized, oh, it actually is true. We have many, many, many LGBTQIA characters in our stories, and yet we don't have enough leads.
So she's complaining about the fact that we have characters who tick off all these degenerate boxes, but they weren't the main characters.
So what they want is, in 10 years, those major movies, whatever movies are come out within the next 10 years, to have lead queer characters. Mm-hmm. And that kids will grow up with queer heroes.
It's like what they're doing right now. They're remaking those, again, the movies from the 90s known as the Disney Renaissance. They're remaking those, and they're casting minorities as the characters now. The Little Mermaid is going to be played by a black actress like this. So they're doing the racial remake now, and then in another 10 years, it's going to be the gender remake. So, but yeah, this is Disney. This is one of the biggest companies in America, certainly one of the biggest cultural icons in American history. They've been around since, I think, the 40s. They've created some of the most iconic childhood characters. I mean, I'm going to go off on a limb here. I'm going to take this moment to say this, not to sound like a hipster. I've never been crazy about Disney. I was never a huge fan of Disney, even as a kid. I liked some of the movies. I liked Lion King. I liked Toy Story, and I still do like Toy Story. The Toy Story movies are great. Those are wholesome. Those managed to steer clear of all this crap, even, with the most recent one, the fourth one. But I was never as into Disney as I was to other cartoons and movies from my childhood. But think of how many kids grew up on the Disney movies, singing along to all those famous songs, from Aladdin or whatever, and all those other movies.
That's why most of the people who visit Disney World are adults. They're basically
that's a good point. Yeah,
they're all Disney cultists who grew up on this stuff, and that's why there's more adults at Disney World than there are kids usually.
It was kind of like the original Marvel. Marvel is going to take over as a big pop culture cult now. Although of course Marvel is owned by Disney, as is Star Wars. So the point being, the Disney Corporation that owns these properties, from all the Mickey Mouse characters to Star Wars to Marvel to anything else that they own. They are going to push this in all of their media now. And it's going, whether, you can try to patrol your kids all you want, cancel a Disney Plus subscription, what have you. it's still going to seep into the pop culture. You're going to walk by, an aisle in Target with the kids, the toys or whatever, or the Disney themed backpacks, and it's going to be some queer black woman character on the backpacks or whatever. Things like that. They know how deeply ingrained Disney is in society, and they're going to use it to their advantage any way they can. And that's why people are calling out Disney, and should be. And you're seeing like lots of people canceling their subscriptions, lots of people saying they won't go to the theme parks anymore, which is a good start, but it's going to take a lot more than that. It is going to take direct action against the corporation, for violating Florida law in this case, certainly, but beyond that as well.
Well, so one of the debates on the right now is it worth trying to boycott Disney? Because Disney is such an institution in American society. Are you better off just criticizing Disney and hoping that they change, or are you better off just completely boycotting, not going to Disney World, not going to Disneyland, not buying Disney Plus, not buying their subscriptions, not buying their movies? And I would argue that it is, because remember whenever Disney bought ABC back in the 90s, whenever Ellen DeGeneres came out of the closet, the AFA, the American Family Association, actually led a boycott of the show Ellen, and Disney immediately pulled it. They immediately pulled Ellen off the air because they couldn't they couldn't afford it. Couldn't afford to lose the money. The boycotts in some instances do work, especially if parents feel like a company is targeting their children. Now, just to go back to my larger point about the fact that these people see this as a religious crusade or a moral crusade, Disney's activism partner Nadine Smith of Equality Florida told LGBTQ employees that DeSantis and his spokesperson Christina Pushaw want to, quote, erase you, quote, criminalize your existence, and, quote, take your kids. Now, Christopher Rufo, in his tweet, he claimed that this is a wild conspiracy theory that Republicans wanted to kidnap gay people's children, but that's not exactly what they are claiming. It's actually true that we do want to take these predators' kids away from them because they're not capable of being responsible parents. We do need to take their kids and put them in foster home.
Take those kids away from Carrie Burke and others like them who are trying to instill in them pretty much from birth. Oh, you're trans, you're pan, you're not really a particular gender. Take those kids away for their own safety and throw charges at Carrie Burke and all the other people like her.
But let's think about what else she's saying. She's saying that they want to erase you and criminalize your existence. Now, a lot of conservatives would
criminalize their existence. Criminalize their attempts to indoctrinate other people with it.
Yes, well, a lot of conservatives say, no, this is just hyperbolic. You're just blowing things out of proportion. We really don't hate trans people and gay people and all this other stuff. But when you think about what she means by erase you, yes, we do want to erase them from being able to come out and advocate this stuff, because they cannot exist as, fully
normal,
non-binary without advocating for it. They can't. We do want to criminalize their existence in the sense that we want to, like you said, criminalize their ability to preach their gospel of non-binary, transgenderism, LGBTQIA plus whatever else that this gender identity that they're trying to force on people.
Because it is so harmful to them. We see all the stats. There's memes about it, but the stats that how many, 60% of trans whatever people try to commit suicide? Or maybe it's not 60, but it's somewhere, I think, it's a high number that they attempt suicide at some point in their life, regardless of whether or not they get, the gender-affirming surgery. Studies showed that even if they get the treatment they want, they get, they get cut up and they take all the hormone blockers, whatever, they're still miserable and they still try to kill themselves. And they're trying to preach this to kids, that minors, little children, prepubescent children can have these surgeries done to them. They can be given these hormones and these other treatments, estrogen, testosterone, what have you. And this is stuff that's irreversible, that permanently damages their bodies at a very young age. It's no different. I would argue it's even worse, but for a better comparison, it's like, trying to indulge anorexic people and to say, oh no, there's nothing wrong with you. You do need to lose weight. You're strong and independent in your valiant fight to lose weight. You go, girl, you go, young man, whatever. You're indulging them in a mental illness that they have. I mean, not the kids I'm saying, but the people trying to teach them this. Those people are mentally ill. Those trannies we just showed in those TikTok compilations, the guy in the dress, the Asian guy with the sock puppet, they're mentally ill, mentally unstable. They should not be allowed anywhere near children.
Which brings us to the definition of groomer.
Yes.
Now, this, in my opinion, is the best marketing campaign that the right has come up in my lifetime. This is one thing that the right has always trying to play catch up to with the left, and that is marketing. Leftists are fantastic marketers because they know how to appeal to people's emotions. Because take race, for instance. You can choose. Do you want to stand with the racist or do you want to stand with the anti-racist? It's the marketing campaign that normies simply don't have any defense mechanism to fight back against, so they naturally fall into the leftist category, even if those normies are not themselves leftist.
Usually, if you try to ask the Republican Party to come up with messaging, they come up with like socialist. Socialist is the big one they love to push. Socialism sucks. But you had a few more recently, like again in the Virginia election, the fight against critical race theory. That was really powerful. It touched on transgenderism a bit, but not to the same extent that we're seeing right now.
So the term groomer, traditionally, when people think of what a groomer is, they're thinking of a pedophile who is trying to groom kids to be his or her sexual partner. In this instance...
Or to be sexually active in general.
Yes, this is what naturally pops into people's minds. Now, this is not what conservatives mean when they say groomer in this particular instance. These teachers aren't necessarily grooming their students to be their sexual partners. Mm-hmm. They are grooming these kids to grow up to be gender nonconforming, because they understand that if they can get these kids, because if you look at the polls, Gen Z is like 20% identifies as gender nonconforming. That's LGBTQIA plus, either gay, bisexual, transgender, or they claim to be non-binary.
More than twice as many as in the millennial generation, and more than twice as many as 10 years ago.
Yes, and like with the baby boomers, it's less than 2% who claim to be a part of that gender nonconforming community, whereas it's increased tenfold with Gen Z. And they would like to boost those numbers as high as they possibly can, because they understand that gender nonconforming people are going to vote for leftists. They're going to vote for people who are non-traditional, because these people ultimately want to completely obliterate traditional society. They want to obliterate the home, the family, like the traditional father, mother, and children, the church. Now, the problem that leftists have is that because they're so career-focused, and, of course, because they promoted feminism, they're not having children at the same rate that conservatives are having children.
That's right.
So by the law of attrition, they are going to be outnumbered 5-1 within the next 20 years, simply because conservatives are having kids. They're raising their kids to be conservative. Liberals are not having children, and they're going to die off, and there's going to be much far fewer of them than there are conservatives. So the only solution is to groom conservative kids to become liberals.
And
they have to do this in the classroom, where people send their kids to get an education to succeed in the workplace.
And they keep it away from their parents. And again, the time-honored method that's always proven successful for them is they couch it in the rhetoric of, oh, everything you thought you knew is wrong. We're liberating you. We're teaching you to think critically and open up new avenues and explore the world for yourself. Everything that your parents said, everything that your pastor, that your church told you, oh, that's the old way of thinking. Be free, be independent. Because we all know teenagers go through those rebellious phases and whatnot. They just want to rebel against whatever is cool, whatever's popular. It's almost like just a built-in hipster complex. But they want to rebel against their parents. Most kids go through that. And these teachers pander to that. And most importantly, what you said is, they're grooming them to be, to question their gender identity and be sexually active. And then you have cases like that Texas case where the divorced couple, the mom and the dad, they have a son. The dad is just spending his weekends with him normally. And the mom, when she's with the son, is teaching him to be a girl and to wear dresses and calling him by a different name. The father finds out about it. He films himself questioning his son, very innocently, but revealing what mom does. They go to court, and the judge rules in the mom's favor. And the mom gets to have the kid, and she gets to transition the kid.
And the father has to pay for the transition.
Yes. And calling it grooming is so powerful. And it's important because this word didn't just come out of nowhere. This is something that has been around on the right for a few years now. Going back, of course, here in America, I think prior to this, it was most often seen on the really fringe elements of the far right, the internet right, namely the QAnon crowd, with the whole satanic, pedophile, global cabal cult nonsense. Like they're grooming children to be, prostitutes the moment they're born, stuff like they're harvesting fetuses for sexual pleasure, all that, Alex Jones stuff, whatever. But also it was used a little further back in the mid-2010s in a handful of European countries, primarily the UK and a few others. Again, with elements of the so-called far right, like Tommy Robinson in the UK is a prime example, in reference not to, transgender stuff, in reference to Muslim migrants, who, of course, peaked in the mid-2010s with the Syrian civil war, the migrants that were just flooding into Europe, flooding into France and the UK, and famously, of course, creating no-go zones. Remember that? They were basically self-segregating into entirely Muslim-only neighborhoods. And in addition to that, there were Muslim grooming gangs roaming around the streets, preying on young European women, teenagers, young adults, even little girls, because, child brides are a thing in Islam, and grooming them to be Muslim brides and to have Muslim children. So that was the thing. But of course, in both of these cases, justifiably in the QAnon case, but not so justified in the European case, because that was a real thing. But in both cases, the media dismissed and said, oh, these are far-right, anti-Semitic, homophobic, neo-Nazi, white supremacist racist, misogynistic, whatever, every slur they can think of, conspiracy theories, dismiss them. So they were only really used by the fringe. But now it's finally happening. It's happening on such a large scale, and we're seeing it. We're seeing it through Disney. We're seeing it through these teachers on TikTok. It's becoming so apparent they can't run away from it. And again, the same general crowd that was going after critical race theory, again, Chris Rufo and others are calling this out as well, because it's very much the other side of the coin as critical race theory. It's just using gender and sexuality instead of race. And it's become so apparent that you have no choice but to just call them what they are. And again, it is the simplest, most straightforward message. Because like critical race theory, if you get down and bogged down in the weeds of the terminology, the acronyms with 52 letters and all that stuff, and gender identity, fluidity, whatever, most people will just kind of scratch their heads and be like, wait, what is all this? It's biology, I don't understand. If you just say, they're grooming your kids, most people understand what that means.
Right.
And they will run with it. And you will have something like in Virginia. If, like, for example, if the Virginia election were being held today and Youngkin were hitting on the same issues now, critical race theory and transgenderism, he'd win by at least 5 points, I think. So let's go to the Never Trump Conservative Inc. establishment and their take on all of this. So one example is a guy named Matt Lewis. You may remember that. He was once ostensibly conservative. He was with the Daily Caller before he left Daily Caller to join the Daily Beast after Trump got elected. He is another one of these guys that these mainstream media outlets love to have on as a so-called conservative. Like CNN does this with Anna Navarro every time they have her on. They say, we have a conservative Republican here who doesn't like Trump. We have our token, even though these people are not conservatives in any sense of the word. So for the Daily Beast, that bastion of conservatism, he writes, quote, MAGAs to conservatives, you're with us or you're a groomer. That's the headline. He writes, the promiscuous use of the term groomer in political conversation is the latest escalation in our already toxic political environment. I know because I have firsthand knowledge. Wait, you have firsthand knowledge of grooming kids? Like, man, that's what I take away from it. Phrasing there, buddy. That's like you said, Jacob, these people cannot write to save their lives. On Wednesday, I called the term groomer a slur, which led to many people, or bots, I love they always just default to, they must be bots, in the MAGA Twitter sphere hurling at me. I'm hardly the only one, and the taunting is not reserved for nameless trolls. Author and anti-critical race theory thought leader James Lindsay called David Frum, David French, and conservative writer Nate Hochman, probably not a real conservative then if you think he is, he called them groomers for similar reasons. Based James Lindsay, let's go. In other words, MAGA maniacs, cute alliteration there, Matty boy. MAGA maniacs are saying to conservatives, you're either with us all the way or you're a groomer. My tweet went viral because it angered Christina Pushaw, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis' press secretary, who pushed it into her Twitter timeline, adding, hey, Matt, please educate me. What's the politically correct term for an adult who advocates for instructing young children about concepts like pansexual and gender fluid while keeping secrets from their parents, end quote. That's true. Everything she just said is true. What else do you call that if you're trying to teach this to little kids? Because, again, let's go back to the Florida law. The Florida law, the parental rights law that they call Don't Say Gay bill, what they're all getting their panties in a twist about. The law dictates that sexually inappropriate content will not be taught in Florida public schools in the grades of kindergarten through third grade. K through third grade. So definitely prepubescent children, nowhere near close to their teenage years yet, being taught about transgenderism and sexuality is bad. That's what the law says. And that's what they're getting all worked up about. But they conveniently leave that part out. Of course, Matt leaves that out as well. He goes on, he rebuts this with, quote, if we are talking about little kids in a public school, I would call that wrong, wholly inappropriate, and indoctrination. And I will not defend this indoctrination. I'm a conservative. I live in a red state, blah, 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 whatever. At the same time, I believe that words have defined meanings. This is the same point I made when I criticized Joe Biden for redefining language, including the terms bipartisan and court packing. Google the word grooming, he says. The literal meaning has to do with brushing and cleaning. Okay, all right. You want to go there, like, fine. Okay, that's semantics. Of course, semantics is one of the favorite things to run to, is to say, like, oh, words have set definitions and you can never, ever change the original definition of a word. All right, boy, then what about the word gay? Remember, Jacob, you know the original definition of the word gay, like, way back when?
Well, it's funny.
It means happy.
Yeah, you watch
any
black and white movie, they throw the word gay around all the time back when it had its innocent meaning.
In the Flintstones opening theme song, it ends with, we'll have a gay old time. So are the Flintstones homosexuals now? Is that what they're going for here? Like, no. So this guy's definition, this idea is like, oh, you can't change the definition of a word for it. A word is the same throughout all of history. That's essentially his argument, which obviously does not hold up in the slightest. So he just goes on Today's right is taking a page from the Saul Alinsky Radical Left Handbook, which says, make the enemy live up to its own book of rules.
Which it's about damn time.
It's true. He writes it like it's a bad thing. Saul Alinsky was a terrible person, obviously, but he had smart rules. The rules worked for the left, and they should work for us. He ends the article with this. In response, some on the right are hurling a horrific insult at anyone who disagrees with their tactics. It's hard to see how this ends well. Well, gee, if the left is any indication, I'd say that tactic works pretty darn well. Wouldn't you agree, Jacob?
The difference between him and people who, the MAGAs, as he calls them, is the conservatives like him who live, of course, he lives in Alexandria, Virginia, of course he does. These conservatives who live in dark blue areas, they want to live in a world where everyone is polite. Everyone who makes political opinions is educated. They all sit across and sip tea, like we're all in an English manor or whatever. The problem they don't understand is this is an actual culture war. Like, they want to live in a world without a culture war. And look, he makes the argument that conservatives will claim that leftists started the culture war, so we have to finish it. And he fundamentally rejects that. And this is what all the never-Trumpers do. They fundamentally reject the notion that conservatives have to respond when they're attacked in the culture war, that we can take the high ground, and the vast majority of normal Americans will see that we're taking the high ground. And because they're fundamentally good people, they will side with us. The problem is all those fundamentally good people out there, all those good normie Americans, they don't receive the news in a fair and balanced way. So they don't understand what teachers are teaching their children unless we fight back using the Saul Alinsky tactics that were used against us. Even National Review doesn't get it. They write the Groomer accusation is counterproductive. And of course, they write, this is by David Harsanyi, Groomer has become the fashionable charge to level against anyone who opposes Florida's parental rights bill, yada, yada, yada. And he basically makes the argument that, yes, the left is evil. Yes, what they're doing is evil. Yes, they are being groomers, but let's don't call them groomers.
Don't call them names.
Yeah, let's don't call them names because this is disingenuous. And he argues that this isn't the correct definition of the word. The correct definition of the word is a pedophile who is grooming a kid to be a pedophile. And this isn't, or to be sexually active. And this isn't correct. And he's basically arguing that he's using the same argument against the right when it comes to the word groomer that the right uses against the left when it comes to racism. But do you think that leftists say, okay, you're right, we shouldn't throw around the word racist? No, of course not. It works. Your average normie out there doesn't agree with racism. They don't know what racism is, but they don't agree with it because they've been taught that you can lose your job if you're accused of being a racist. So they're not going to say anything that can be perceived by activists as racist. If someone says, don't say that, that's racist, they will shut up. I'm talking about your average normie will shut up and they'll say, okay, I'll never say that word again if that's racist, even if it's not racist. It's just they've been taught, they've been educated to believe that if you know what's good for you, you will not be racist. Now, what is racist? They don't know, but if someone says something is racist, you don't go there. And so he's arguing we don't need to do this with the word groomer. I completely disagree. I think this is a fantastic tactic. Just throw the word groomer around, make it stick because it's going to stick. Nobody wants to be known as being a groomer. And the thing is, they can't sue you over this.
Exactly.
Because they can argue, like, who's the guy that the Daily Beast guy, the author that you just read?
Matt Lewis.
So, like, the argument that Matt Lewis makes in his article is that this is a potential lawsuit. This is libel and stuff. But it's not. Even he concedes.
Libel laws in the United States are very weak.
Yeah, he concedes that it's very ambiguous. He concedes it's very ambiguous, and you can get away with it because the definition that we're using for groomer is someone who is grooming kids to be gender nonconforming.
To be sexually active, to be sexually degenerate, to potentially get mutilated in surgery and with hormone treatment.
So this is a perfect description, in my opinion, by putting the okay groomer on these people is the best tactic that the right has used in my entire lifetime.
There's nothing more powerful than saying they are coming for your kids. And it was one thing, again, in Virginia with critical race theory, we saw it with, they're teaching your kids to hate themselves for being white and to treat, their black classmates as better than them, to look at their black classmates as perpetual victims and to look at themselves as perpetual oppressors. And they're telling your kids to hate you if you dare to criticize this and say this is bad. Then they'll think, oh, mommy and daddy must be racist. So now it's the same thing except with gender. They're teaching you there is no such thing as gender. You can be whatever you want. And if your parents try to tell you otherwise, then they're enforcing their patriarchal worldview on you or some such nonsense. And this worked again thanks to COVID. One of the silver linings of COVID, the remote learning and virtual learning allowed a window right into the critical race theory that was happening. And transgenderism, again, was on the radar as well in Virginia. Famously, you had the Loudoun County case where a tranny, a boy identifying as a girl, raped two different girls, two freshman girls in two different schools, and the school district covered it up because it was right before Pride Month, the LGBTQXYZ barbecue, KKK, LMAO crowd in June. And it was very powerful in Virginia, and it is going to happen. I think that's definitely going to have an impact nationwide, and they have no argument for it. Their only argument is to either say, oh, you're transphobic, you're intolerant, or they just say, oh, it's not really happening, which obviously the evidence speaks for itself. It is happening. I so cannot wait for November. If this keeps up the way it is, it's going to be fabulous. Every campaign ad, every attack ad, okay, groomer. That's all that needs to be said. On that note, that is all the time we have left for this episode of The Right Take. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. As always, be sure to follow all of our latest content at our website, righttakepodcast.com. Look at the full list of social media websites and podcast platforms where we are available at righttakepodcast.com/subscribe. And as always, guys, if you are feeling ever so generous, righttakepodcast.com/support. We'll talk to you next week, guys.